Joining me for today's big interview is the South African Revenue Services Commissioner, Edward Kieswetter. South African tax season started yesterday, Mr. Commissioner, and you have been very, very busy. Not only have you been busy trying to work out where your office is located and who is who in the zoo, but you have had to deal with collecting a huge amount of money in an economy that is struggling. So I want to ask you, do you have any regrets?
Regrets about what?
Taking up the job.
No, I don't have regrets.
Not yet.
Godfrey. I am mindful, even when I accepted the job, that this is going to be a tough role. It's not going to be a walk in the park. But also that it's a necessary role if we want our democracy to succeed, if we want government to build a capable state, one that we all cry out for, then the success of South African Revenue Service is central. And I'm privileged and honored to be able to lead such an incredible organization with such wonderful people, albeit all the challenges that we face.
Absolutely. So you have been asked to raise 1.4 trillion rand. How do you feel about that?
The revenue challenge is tough, and let me explain why.
I left my question deliberately without any flowers.
That's fine, and I'll answer it without any flowers. So, firstly, tax collection is simply an overlay of economic activities.
True.
And so if the economy struggles, as ours sadly are struggling at the moment, then revenue collection is a reflection of that. You can imagine that if your economy grows at 1%, and you want to grow your revenue at 6% or 10%, something else has to happen.
100%.
And so what has to happen is what I want to talk about. Because first of all, the difference between what the economy provides and what we collect is called compliance.
Right.
It is a function of how well SARS is capable of giving effect to its mandate that is in law. And so we find that whilst most taxpayers are honest and fulfill the obligation, and I'll come to that in a moment in relation to filing season, we unfortunately, as I take the public into our confidence and share with you some of the challenges we find and the concerns that I've expressed around behaviors of non-compliance. Now, you would think that not submitting a return is just a matter of casual negligence.
Right.
Well, it's actually a criminal offense.
Aha.
Right? And so we find in our experience that there's at least 10% of South Africans who do not and have not filed on time. And there's a set of actions to enforce that.
Right.
Secondly, and unfortunately, we still have trends of taxpayers who try and mask some of their income and therefore don't disclose all of their income, and taxpayers who inflate their expenses. And remember, the combination of that tends to then minimize your obligation to pay tax. That's breaking the law. Fraudulently creating a situation where you may get a VAT, a tax refund, whether it's an income tax or a VAT, whatever refund, is quite frankly a criminal offense. We see tax preparers who are supposed to help taxpayers comply. They collude in breaking the law. Unfortunately, some of our own staff have colluded, and you've seen some convictions. I can tell you now that by our estimate last year and the work we do, we have prevented over 8 billion rands of fraudulent refunds flowing out of SARS. We have also prosecuted a number of taxpayers, and some of them have been convicted. So it is that work that we focus on. Now, when you add that to what you've read in the Nugent report, the challenges we face, the work of rebuilding SARS and capacitating it again is a long and diligent piece of work that has thankfully commenced. but is going to take months, if not years,
Yeah.
to repair. We also, obviously, in addition to building people capacity, have to make better use of technology to help us, on the one hand, deliver great service,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, also detect non-compliance.
Yeah, and of course, a large part of your job would be made easier if people complied with the filing requirements. And a large part of that has to do, you guys in the industry call it tax morality. And I wanted to know how far South Africans are in terms of tax morality when you compare with other parts of the world.
Some of the highest tax morality is in the Nordic countries,
Sure.
where they report that they have about 90% compliance.
Sure.
South Africa is significantly lower than that.
Where are we?
Well, I don't want to speculate on a number, but it's well below 70% at the moment in terms of tax morality.
Sure.
Now, and therefore we're doing a significant piece of work on understanding and closing the tax gap.
Yeah.
But let me talk about tax morality. Tax morality is often a reflection of general morality in society,
Yes.
and compliance is generally a function of overall civil obedience and compliance.
And satisfaction with the conduct of affairs of the nation.
And part of that is also when people have lost confidence in the Revenue Authority, when people have lost confidence in the government's ability to deliver services,
Yeah.
they feel morally justified
Yes,
to withhold their
in
taxes.
yes.
Now, apart from the fact that that justification is still in
Outside the
contravention of the law,
Yeah.
it just then makes the work that we have to do so much more important,
Yeah.
and the single-minded focus we need
Yeah.
to close that gap.
Absolutely. South Africa, of course, when you look at the African continent in terms of its collection of revenues compared to GDP, is the highest, actually. I think the last number that I had is around 25%. I don't know where that stands at the
We are
moment.
not the highest.
No?
Okay? No, we are not the highest.
In Africa?
I mean, there are countries that are higher than ours, and we are not the lowest. So we're somewhere, in the middle to the upper third of that. But it's not that number in absolute.
Sure.
So, for example, coming back to the Nordic countries, their tax burden is significantly higher than ours, but they would argue their social dividend and public goods and services is significantly higher than ours. So one has to marry the two.
Yeah.
You would be more comfortable paying your taxes, and now I'm not talking about the legal obligation, I'm talking of your moral and ethical commitment to doing it.
Yeah.
You would be a lot more willing to do so if you felt that what you received in return was commensurate with that.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue.
Yeah.
It's not the absolute
number itself. Well, I was raising that number as a way to get into another question. And the question that I wanted to ask you is, while you are struggling to collect in a slowing economy, in an economy that is not growing at its potential, the question that has always been with South Africans, and it goes back to 1994, you've got a small tax base and you need to expand it. Mm-hmm. So you could get the target by aggressively going after those who are already paying, but what about the effort to make the net bigger?
So that's important work for us, to ensure that everyone who should be registered is registered, and all those registered declare honestly and timeously.
Yes.
And that declaration then matches the tax contribution that they make. So there's a significant amount of work that we're doing. But how we use and deploy resources is important, Godfrey. Mm. So we follow an international best practice of what is known a voluntary compliance approach. Mm. And the reason for that is that you use the word aggressive. That word isn't part of our lexicon. We need to enforce responsibly, even-handedly, and decisively. But if we step back, voluntary compliance seeks to understand the behavioral traits of people. And we know that most people are actually honest and simply wants to fulfill the obligation. So our entire approach, our entire resource allocation is built on three pillars.
Sure.
Firstly, help people understand their obligation, clarify it, and create certainty. And that's very important. You shouldn't have to second guess what your obligation is.
Sure.
So that's the first principle of clarity and awareness. The second principle is provide a level of service that makes it effortless, seamless, and simple for those who want to comply. And the third one is equally important: make it hard for those taxpayers who choose not to comply to get away, and detect them and then enforce the law.
Yeah, I'm reminded of this wording, steel ring, but still soft ring. I don't know how you do it. Technology could make your job easier, couldn't it?
So let me give you an update
very quickly
of what we do. So yesterday we had a big message to invite taxpayers to use our online services. Firstly, because, and I hope, Godfrey, you've downloaded the Mobi app. If you haven't and you need some help, we can help you. It's really, I really would encourage people. There were some stumbles yesterday because of the overwhelming response. But we're dealing with that, and I can give taxpayers the assurance the system has integrity, it works. We've already had close on to 120,000 South Africans who have filed using e-filing very successfully. And so the system works. We will work through the glitches. But behind that effortless and seamless service, we also increasingly make use of big data. So we're expanding our data sets from your employer, from your bank, from your insurance provider, and other service providers. We feed that into our data set, and then we write sophisticated algorithms and risk rules so that when you declare, it's easier for us to assess you because we match it with the information we have.
You already have.
You disclose information you don't have, but it also helps us to detect any attempt to under-disclose or over-disclose income and expenditure, and that then flags you and takes you down a different path of audit, and eventually may result in additional taxes that you are paid, and eventually, if there was criminal intent, in conviction.
You get prosecuted. Commissioner, let's leave it there. I think this discussion goes way beyond, and one day I'm hoping we'll have a discussion about more efficient ways of taxing people. But today, we're out of time. Thank you, sir, for coming in.